What if your peace was never peace? What if all those moments where you stayed quiet weren't wisdom, but survival? You didn't stay silent because you were evolved. You stayed silent because you were trained to fear your own voice, and that training cost you something. In this video, we're not talking about becoming aggressive. We're talking about reclaiming the strength that got buried under politeness, about understanding why you avoid conflict, even when your soul is screaming, and what to do when being nice starts to destroy who you are. We'll break this down, step by step, using real psychology, real philosophy, and the truth you've always felt but couldn't name, because the fear of conflict isn't your nature, it's your programming, and it's time we rewire it from the inside. Have you ever noticed how quickly you bite your tongue? That split-second decision to let it go, to keep things calm, to be the bigger person. How many times have you silenced yourself, not because you were wise, but because you were afraid? That meeting where you had the solution but stayed quiet. That family dinner where you swallowed your politics. That relationship where you became who they needed. That job where you smiled through disrespect. Afraid of being called aggressive. Afraid of disappointing someone. Afraid of losing what little peace you had. But here's the truth that no one taught you. Every time you silence what matters, you shrink. And shrinking doesn't make you stronger. It makes you invisible. It makes you compliant. It makes you forgettable, even to yourself. You weren't born afraid of conflict. You were trained. Since childhood, the rules were clear. Don't argue. Don't raise your voice. Be polite. Be good. But goodness, as they defined it, wasn't integrity. It was obedience. It was emotional taming. It was your first lesson in self-erasure, and you learned it well. You learned to walk on eggshells even when you were right. You learned to smile while swallowing your anger. You learned to praise others while forgetting yourself. At Thanksgiving tables where your truth wasn't welcome. In corporate meetings where your ideas were dismissed. On dating apps where you performed a version of yourself. In friendships where you were always the giver. They applauded you for being mature, but what they really meant was manageable. Peace became a costume, and that costume became your cage. Now you're older. You look composed. You seem calm, but something inside you is burning. A quiet resentment, a flickering rebellion that you keep pushing down. And here's where the damage deepens. That suppressed voice, it doesn't disappear. It turns inward. It becomes anxiety. It becomes exhaustion. It becomes confusion. And you start to wonder if you're the problem. You're not. You're just living under a script that was written to keep you small. Friedrich Nietzsche called this dynamic slave morality. It's a system of values designed not by those who are free, but by those who fear freedom. By those too afraid to confront, too afraid to say no, too afraid to claim power. So they rewrote passivity as virtue, and they passed that story down to your parents, to your teachers, to you. That's why your silence doesn't feel like peace, because it isn't. Real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. Real peace comes from surviving it and staying whole. This isn't a video about starting fights. It's about ending a war that's been happening inside you for years. A war between who you were told to be and who you actually are. In the next few minutes, we'll walk through that war together. You'll understand the psychology behind why you shut down. You'll see how your brain was wired to submit, even when you were right. And most of all, you'll remember what it feels like to speak without apology. Because underneath all that fear, you don't have a weak voice. You have a voice that was never given permission to be loud. Let's change that. Right now. You didn't just become afraid of conflict. You were conditioned to be. Not through direct threats, but through reward and shame. They praised you when you gave in. They scolded you when you questioned. They taught you to equate stillness with goodness and resistance with guilt. But what if that praise wasn't love? What if it was control? Friedrich Nietzsche called this system slave morality. It's the morality of the subdued, of those who feel powerless in the world and cope by redefining their weakness as virtue. In slave morality, the strong are called evil. The compliant are called good. It turns self-sacrifice into a badge of honor and self-expression into sin. You weren't raised to be free. You were raised to be safe in someone else's world. Psychologically, this maps exactly to what cognitive behavioral therapy identifies as submission schemas, especially subjugation and self-sacrifice. You were trained to place others' needs above your own, not because you loved them, but because you feared what would happen if you didn't. When you're faced with a potential conflict, your brain, specifically the amygdala, lights up as if you were in physical danger. Your prefrontal cortex, which should help you regulate, is already compromised by years of conditioning. And so your nervous system does what it always did. It fawns. It freezes. You avoid. You comply. The most dangerous part? You start calling this collapse of self your personality. You say, I'm just easygoing. I don't like drama. I'm chill. But you're not chill. You're trained. And deep down, you feel the burn, that low-grade fury, the weight of invisible chains. Not rage at others, but rage at yourself for not knowing how to stop it. This is the cost of internalized submission. You confuse safety with silence. You confuse love with performance. You confuse peace with erasure. Some people call this being too nice, but it's not niceness. It's psychological self-abandonment. The truth, you learn to survive by becoming small. Because somewhere along the way, you realize something brutal. If you show your strength, you'll lose their approval. If you disagree, you'll be labeled difficult. If you say no, you'll be alone. That's how fear hardwires itself into your identity. You no longer need anyone to suppress you. You do it yourself. This is learned powerlessness. And like all things learned, it can be unlearned. But it won't be easy, because the first enemy you'll face is your own guilt. That knot in your chest when you say no. That fear in your stomach when you assert a boundary. That voice in your head that whispers, you're being selfish. No, you're not. You're waking up. You're remembering that freedom isn't found in being liked. It's found in being real. And realness will cost you. It will cost you approval. It will cost you old identities. It will cost you relationships built on obedience. But what you gain is yourself. You weren't weak. You were adaptive. What looked like silence was your brain protecting you. What looked like freezing was your nervous system trying to keep you alive. That shutdown you hate, that moment when your voice disappears, your thoughts blur, your hands shake, isn't you failing. It's your brain doing exactly what it was trained to do. Let's go back. Imagine a child who's scolded for speaking up, who's ignored when they express sadness, who's punished for saying no. Over time, that child learns a rule. It's not safe to be fully present, so the brain adapts. Each time the child feels a rising emotion, anger, fear, defiance, the brain steps in to protect them. It activates the amygdala, preparing for a threat. It suppresses the prefrontal cortex, limiting reflective thought. And it floods the body with stress hormones like cortisol, preparing to freeze, flee, or fawn. That child becomes an adult. And the world still feels threatening, not because it is, but because the brain never got the message that it's finally safe. The shutdown is not random. It's rehearsed. It's encoded. It's a reflex. And the worst part? Every time it happens again, when you avoid that conversation, stay quiet in that meeting, smile while being disrespected, you reinforce the neural pathway that says, silence keeps me safe, voice equals danger. This is called learned threat response. It's not about trauma with a capital T. It's about repetition, micro moments, thousands of times, and what fires together, wires together. Now here's where the damage becomes invisible. Because the shutdown works temporarily. You avoid the argument. You maintain peace. You don't rock the boat. But deep inside, something breaks. You begin to doubt your own emotions. You question your instincts. You gaslight yourself before anyone else has the chance to. That's not emotional regulation. That's self-erasure. Neuropsychology has a term for this state, hypoarousal. It's not panic. It's numbness. Low energy, low motivation, foggy thoughts, blank stares. You don't scream, you collapse. You say, I don't even know what I feel anymore, because your system shut the door on your own emotional world to protect you from being punished for having one. You weren't made to be this quiet. You were made to connect, express, and protect your inner world. But when expression is unsafe, your body chooses survival over authenticity. And here's the painful paradox. The more you disconnect to avoid pain, the more pain you accumulate in silence. So what now? You can't positive think your way out of a nervous system reaction. You need recalibration, not just mindset shifts, but physiological and psychological rewiring. And it starts small. You notice the shutdown without judgment. You name it. My brain thinks I'm in danger. You breathe into presence, deep, conscious, slow. You speak, even if your voice shakes. You hold your ground, even if your knees tremble. Each time you do this, something extraordinary happens. You're no longer rehearsing the shutdown. You're rehearsing freedom. Comment "I feel this" if your body recognized itself in these words. Because the truth is, you're not broken. You're patterned. And patterns can be broken. Not by violence, not by force, but by gentle consistency and deep, conscious courage. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that conflict is violence, that disagreement is disrespect, that speaking up means you're the problem. But that's a lie, and it's a dangerous one, because it convinces you that your voice is a weapon, when it's actually a bridge. Let's be clear, conflict isn't violence. Conflict is contact. It's the moment when two truths collide. Not to destroy, but to reveal. Real relationships, the honest ones, require friction, because friction means you're real. It means you're not disappearing to make someone else feel comfortable, but your brain doesn't see it that way. When you feel tension, your nervous system floods you with signals to retreat, because it remembers, last time I spoke up, I was punished. Last time I said no, I was abandoned. Last time I was honest, I lost someone. So now, even minor conflict feels like a life-threatening event. That's not an overreaction. That's trauma logic. That's neuroception, the subconscious process by which your brain scans for safety or danger. And if all you've known is instability, confrontation, catastrophe, so you choose silence, politeness, avoidance, keeping the peace. But let's be honest, it's not peace if it costs your voice. It's not kindness if it kills your clarity. Assertiveness is not aggression. Assertiveness is the courage to be seen, without apology. Psychologically, it's a skill rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy, naming your needs, setting boundaries, tolerating discomfort, and doing it without hostility. The goal isn't to overpower, it's to occupy your rightful space in the world, not with force, but with presence. Here's what you were never told. You can say no and still be a good person. You can disagree without being cruel. You can walk away without being broken. And when you begin doing this, at first it will feel wrong. You'll feel guilt. You'll feel shaky. You'll hear that internal voice screaming, "You're being too much. You're selfish. You're going to ruin everything." But that's not your truth. That's your programming. Because the part of you that fears conflict is the same part that fears abandonment. It's the child in you that equated rejection with danger, but you're not that child anymore. And you're not in danger now. You're just in contact with someone who has a different truth. Mature connection isn't about never disagreeing. It's about knowing that disagreement doesn't mean disconnection. When you realize this, when your body feels it, not just your mind, you begin to reclaim power in the most sacred way, by staying rooted when everything in you wants to run. Try this. The next time tension arises, don't flee, don't freeze, don't fawn. Breathe, soften your shoulders, feel your feet on the ground, and say what needs to be said, not to control, but to be honest. That's assertiveness, that's presence, that's peace that doesn't require silence. And remember, you were never too intense. You were just surrounded by people who benefited from your softness. Every time you bite your tongue, every time you say it's fine when it's not, every time you smile through discomfort just to keep things smooth, you feel it. That quiet war, not outside, inside. Between the version of you that wants to be accepted and the version of you that wants to be real. This isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain has two priorities when under stress. Stay safe, stay connected, and when those two conflict, your survival instinct chooses connection, even if it means abandoning truth. This is called attachment override. You silence yourself to preserve the relationship, even if the relationship is killing you from the inside. But here's the thing. Being nice isn't always kind, and being kind doesn't always look nice. Sometimes kindness is uncomfortable. Sometimes it disrupts. Sometimes it requires you to speak the truth, even when it shakes the ground you stand on. Niceness says, don't make waves. Integrity says, don't lose yourself. You've been taught that pleasing others is virtuous, that keeping harmony is maturity, that being agreeable is love. But let me ask you, at what cost? How many times have you betrayed your intuition to be polite? How often have you said yes, just to avoid the pain of rejection? How many versions of yourself did you kill just to be liked? This is the hidden cost of compliance. And cognitively, it becomes a core belief. If I show who I really am, I won't be loved. CBT calls this a maladaptive schema, a core distortion. It affects not just how you relate to others, but how you value yourself. Because eventually you start believing the lie, that your truth is too much, that your limits are selfish, that your honesty is a burden. But the truth is, your integrity is not a liability. It's the source of your sanity. Integrity doesn't scream. It doesn't control. It doesn't need to win. It simply doesn't disappear. It stands, even when the ground shakes. You can't build a life that matters by constantly editing yourself. Every time you bend just to be accepted, you're teaching your nervous system that love is conditional. And over time, you lose touch with what you actually want. You forget how to say no. You forget what joy feels like without performance. You become a version of yourself that feels safe to others, but foreign to you. That's why this war is so exhausting, because you're fighting to be loved while losing the one person you need the most, yourself. But here's the shift. You are allowed to disappoint others. You are allowed to outgrow roles. You are allowed to choose truth over approval, even if it makes people uncomfortable, because the discomfort of living your truth is lighter than the pain of betraying it. Start here. Say no without an explanation. Say yes only when you mean it. Pause before you offer to fix something that was never yours to carry, and feel what happens. The guilt will scream. The programming will panic. But beneath all that, you'll feel something else waking up. You. There's a silence inside you that even you stop noticing. It's not peaceful. It's not stillness. It's the kind of silence that grows where truth was buried alive. You don't forget what you never said. You just store it. In your jaw, in your chest, in your gut. This is emotional repression. Not the kind you choose. The kind that becomes reflex. When emotions were punished, dismissed, or met with coldness, your body did the only thing it could. It learned to mute itself to survive. Neuroscience shows that chronic emotional suppression activates the default mode network in unhealthy ways, creating internal loops of rumination, shame, and cognitive dissonance. Meanwhile, the limbic system, especially the amygdala, remains in high alert, interpreting any emotional surge as a threat. So even joy, grief, or anger can feel dangerous. You say you're tired, but this isn't just fatigue. It's the cost of containment. The nervous system doesn't forget. It only delays the conversation. That lump in your throat when you're about to speak. That heaviness in your chest when you suppress a truth. That brain fog when emotions rise. That's your body saying, I remember. I'm still carrying it. Psychology calls this somatization, when emotional energy, blocked by repression, spills into physical symptoms. And here's the tragic irony. The more emotionally numb you become, the more your body screams. Chronic tension, migraines, gastrointestinal issues, autoimmune flare-ups, panic attacks without cause. All of it. A language you were never taught to understand. And what caused this? Subtle submission. The daily decisions to not rock the boat, to not seem dramatic, to not make things worse. You kept the peace by keeping your truth hostage. You weren't repressing because you were strong. You were repressing because no one made it safe to feel. And the result? You became disconnected from yourself. You don't know what you feel. You can't name your needs. You overanalyze, over-explain, over-function, because feeling was never allowed to be simple. Repressed emotion is unprocessed experience, and unprocessed experience is stuck energy. It loops. It grows roots. It builds armor around your nervous system until even love feels unsafe. So what now? Not fixing, not healing as a goal to be achieved, but reconnection, gently, slowly, with presence. Try this. When a feeling rises, pause, name it. Even if it feels stupid, breathe into it. Let it pass through instead of locking it in. This is how you teach your brain that emotion isn't danger, it's data. And yes, it's terrifying, because letting it out means facing everything you've buried. But repression never made it disappear. It only made it lonely. You don't need to be stronger. You need to be more honest with yourself, even if your voice shakes, even if you cry after, even if you don't yet know what to do with the feeling. That is the beginning of your return. This rewiring isn't instant. Expect 6 to 12 months of consistent practice. Expect setbacks. They're part of the process. Your nervous system needs time to trust this new way. Here's a moment in the healing process that no one talks about. The moment where things get worse before they get better. The moment where the mask cracks and everything you've been holding back rushes in all at once. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. It starts subtly. You wake up and can't move. You stare at the ceiling, wondering how something so heavy can feel so invisible. The things you used to tolerate, the jokes you laughed at, the disrespect you absorbed, the pressure you carried, now feel unbearable. And for the first time, you stop pretending. Not because you want to, but because you can't anymore. This is the collapse, not of your life, but of the false self you built to survive it. And yes, it's terrifying. You'll feel like you're failing, like you're too sensitive, like you've lost your grip. But what's actually happening is a realignment. Your body is done negotiating with your denial. Your nervous system is done absorbing the cost of your silence. Your mind is done lying for the sake of belonging. This collapse is your turning point, not a signal that something's wrong, but proof that something real is finally surfacing. Neuropsychology has a name for this shift: neural reorganization. When old coping pathways, avoidance, submission, over-control, begin to disintegrate, the brain enters a temporary chaos phase. It doesn't know how to react yet, because the familiar scripts are no longer sustainable. Cognitively, this phase is marked by disintegration, a short-term loss of clarity, energy, and emotional regulation as the old structures die out. It's like pulling the plug on an outdated operating system and waiting in silence before the reboot begins. You'll question everything. Who am I without my roles? What do I really believe? Why does everything feel like too much now? This is not weakness, it's grief. You're mourning the version of you that survived and making space for the version that will finally live. You were never meant to hold so much. You were just never given permission to put it down. So when your body finally drops it, you feel the crash. Not because you're broken, but because you're real. This collapse is sacred. It's where the ego softens, where the nervous system begins to thaw, where the truths you've buried begin to speak, not in rage, but in clarity. And here's the shift. Collapse doesn't mean you failed. It means you're done pretending. But now, in the quiet, you have a choice. You can rush back to your old performance, numb the feelings, silence the inner voice, wear the mask again. Or you can sit in this space and listen. Beneath the exhaustion is a signal. Beneath the chaos is a blueprint. Beneath the breakdown is the beginning of something true. This isn't your end. This is the dark before the dawn, the inhale before the scream, the silence before the song. And when you rise, you won't be who you were. You'll be who you were meant to become all along. When the noise settles, when the storm inside finally breaks open, you're left with something rare, a quiet self, not the one you invented to be loved, not the one you performed to be safe, but the self that watched it all and waited for you to return. This is where the real work begins. Not fixing, not perfecting, not hustling for worth, but remembering. Who were you before the mask, before the rules, before the trauma taught you to disappear? That's who you're rebuilding now. Neuroscience calls this stage neuroplastic integration. After collapse, your brain enters a window of malleability. New patterns can form, new beliefs can take root, new identities, rooted in authenticity, can emerge. But this isn't magic, it's deliberate. And it starts with this question: who do I want to be when I'm no longer performing? Maybe you don't know the full answer yet. That's okay. Start small. You rebuild identity by living it, moment by moment. You say no, even when your voice shakes. You rest without guilt. You speak without over-explaining. You feel without editing. Every time you do, you're writing new code into your nervous system. This is what post-traumatic growth looks like. Not a return to who you were, but a birth of who you never had space to become. Here's the truth. You were never broken. You were just over-adapted. You shaped yourself to survive. But now, you get to reshape yourself to live. No more shrinking to be palatable. No more silence to be accepted. No more self-erasure for approval. And here's where it gets even more powerful. This isn't just personal. It's relational. It's cultural. It's generational. Because when one person chooses authenticity over appeasement, they send a ripple through the collective. You show others what's possible, not by preaching, but by being. Your integrity becomes a mirror. Your presence becomes permission. So what does rising without the mask look like? It's not loud. It's not rebellious. It's steady. It's choosing stillness over noise, boundaries over burnout, truth over tension, purpose over performance. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone honest. And as that version of you steps forward, the one who's no longer trying to be liked but trying to be whole, you begin to feel it. The ground beneath you is no longer shaking, because you are no longer running. Now you speak, not to be heard, but because silence is no longer a safe place to hide. Now you walk, not to escape, but because you've chosen to arrive. This is the rebirth, not in flames, but in truth. And that truth will never require a mask again. If this journey spoke to something inside you, something you've kept quiet for too long, then this space is yours. This channel isn't just content, it's a rebellion against silence, against performance, against inherited fear. Comment, "I'm not performing anymore," if you felt seen. Share this with someone who's collapsing, so they know it's not the end, it's the beginning. And subscribe if you're ready to rebuild from the inside out. Welcome back, welcome forward, welcome home.